The gates of a German prisoner of war camp closed with a clang that echoed not just through the barbed wire fences, but through the hearts of every man who had just been captured. The sun had barely risen, and already the camp was alive with activity, guards patrolling the perimeter, dogs barking, and soldiers moving in formation, carrying the weight of both their packs and the uncertainty that awaited them. For countless men caught in the chaos of World War II, these camps, stalags for enlisted men and oflags for officers, were now the world they would inhabit, a world defined by discipline, deprivation, and the delicate balance between hope and despair. Within these fences, the realities of war extended far beyond the battlefield. Every day brought a test of endurance, ingenuity, and the fragile human spirit. From the very first moments of capture, prisoners were acutely aware of the new rules of existence. Stalags, sprawling across German-occupied Europe, were organized for efficiency, yet they functioned as microcosms of control, surveillance, and adaptation. Rows of barracks, often overcrowded and cold, housed men from across continents, speaking different languages but sharing a common fate. The prisoners quickly learned the rigid routines, roll calls at dawn, meager rations, assigned work details, and strict curfews enforced by guards who treated lapses with punishment or intimidation. The physical demands were only part of the challenge. Mental resilience became equally crucial. Men grappled with homesickness, anxiety about the unknown, and the constant threat of disease and malnutrition. Each day blurred into the next, a relentless monotony punctuated by moments of fear, camaraderie, and occasional fleeting joy. In contrast, Oflags, reserved for officers, had a different atmosphere yet faced their own unique pressures. The Geneva Convention exempted officers from manual labor, but this legal protection offered little relief from the psychological strain. Confined to isolated compounds, officers confronted a different battle, one against boredom, frustration, and the slow erosion of hope. Many devoted themselves to intellectual pursuits, learning languages, discussing military strategy, or creating clandestine libraries of books smuggled or scavenged. Some organized theatrical performances or music ensembles, using creativity as a form of resistance against the dulling effects of captivity. These small acts of culture and defiance became lifelines, sustaining morale and reminding prisoners that while their bodies were confined, their minds could remain free. Life in both types of camps was a complex negotiation of survival. Nutrition was scarce and often nutritionally inadequate, forcing prisoners to innovate with food swaps, bartering, or small-scale cultivation in camp gardens. Hygiene presented another daily struggle. Latrines were overcrowded, water was limited, and disease spread quickly in cramped living conditions. Red Cross parcels, when they arrived, were treasured lifelines, offering extra calories, clothing, or writing supplies. Yet the distribution of these parcels could be uneven, sometimes delayed by bureaucracy, theft, or logistical challenges. Each day became a careful calculation of energy, resources, and social navigation, as prisoners formed networks of trust and support, learning who could be relied upon in moments of crisis. Despite the controlled environment, escape and resistance were persistent realities. Stalags and Oflags were heavily guarded, but prisoners continually probed weaknesses in fences, surveillance, and routines. Escape attempts ranged from spontaneous sprints to months-long elaborate tunnels, with meticulous planning, coded messages, and improvised tools. Successes were rare but celebrated with reverence, and even failed attempts carried lessons in ingenuity, cooperation, and resilience. Camps became centers of intelligence gathering, as prisoners recorded troop movements, noted guard behaviors, and exchanged information through clandestine channels. For many, survival depended not only on enduring captivity but also on maintaining agency and purpose through acts of defiance. The psychological landscape of these camps was as varied as the prisoners themselves. Some succumbed to despair, retreating inward, while others adapted, cultivating small routines or personal projects to maintain a sense of control. Humor often emerged as a coping mechanism, a subtle rebellion against the oppressive environment. Stories circulated, jokes were shared quietly, and prisoners found ways to maintain identity in a system that sought to standardize them into numbers and barcodes. Camaraderie became essential. Alliances and friendships not only provided emotional support but could mean the difference between life and death when negotiating scarce resources or navigating the dangerous whims of guards. The treatment of prisoners was uneven, often influenced by nationality, rank, and the attitudes of camp commanders. Western Allied soldiers sometimes experienced conditions that, while harsh, adhered more closely to international agreements. In contrast, Soviet prisoners faced brutality that reflected both ideological disdain and deliberate neglect, leading to high mortality rates. The camps thus mirrored the broader war's inequalities and ideological battles, demonstrating how conflict extended into every corner of human experience. For prisoners, survival was as much about navigating these social and political hierarchies as it was about withstanding hunger or cold. Forced labor was another dimension of captivity that shaped daily life. In stalags, enlisted men were often sent to work details outside the main camp, contributing to agriculture, infrastructure, or wartime production. These assignments, while offering a temporary change of scenery, carried their own hazards, long hours, exposure to the elements, and the risk of accidents or abuse. Officers in Oflags, although exempt from labor, sometimes assisted with planning, education, or clandestine activities that supported fellow prisoners. Both groups faced the constant psychological tension of contributing to a war effort that they had no control over, challenging their sense of morality and loyalty while testing endurance and adaptability. As the war progressed, the camps swelled with prisoners from newly conquered territories. Overcrowding intensified existing challenges, rationing became stricter, disease outbreaks more frequent, and the tension between guards and prisoners heightened. Toward the final years of the conflict, evacuations ahead of advancing Allied or Soviet forces became common, resulting in forced marches across hundreds of kilometers under brutal conditions. These death marches exemplified the extremity of human suffering and the sheer logistical desperation of a collapsing German war machine. Prisoners endured hunger, frostbite, and physical exhaustion while navigating unknown terrain, relying on sheer determination and solidarity to survive. Yet even amid suffering, acts of humanity persisted. Guards sometimes showed unexpected leniency, prisoners shared food and clothing, and organized medical care offered crucial relief. Secret schools, literary circles, and artistic projects became defiant affirmations of life and intellect. Correspondence with family, when allowed, provided vital emotional sustenance, connecting the captured men to a world outside the barbed wire. These threads of humanity wove a complex tapestry, revealing that life, even under extreme oppression, could retain dignity, creativity, and purpose. Liberation brought a mixture of relief and challenge. Many prisoners returned home physically weakened and emotionally scarred, requiring extended care and rehabilitation. The reintegration into civilian life was fraught with obstacles, destroyed homes, missing relatives, and the psychological impact of prolonged captivity. Yet the resilience forged in the camps often guided survivors through these trials. Memoirs, letters, and later historical accounts preserved the lessons of endurance, cooperation, and moral courage, ensuring that the experiences of Stalag and Oflag prisoners would not be forgotten. These stories also provided crucial insight into the human capacity for adaptation, creativity, and defiance even in the harshest conditions. The legacy of Stalags and Oflags is a testament to the complex dimensions of war. Unlike concentration camps designed for systematic extermination, these camps were instruments of containment, control, and exploitation, yet within them, prisoners asserted their humanity through creativity, resistance, and solidarity. They reveal a spectrum of human behavior: fear, cruelty, courage, and compassion, and underscore the psychological, social, and moral battles that paralleled the physical confrontations of World War II. Understanding these camps provides not only historical insight but also enduring lessons about resilience, justice, and the power of the human spirit to endure even in captivity. In the end, the gates of these camps may have enclosed bodies, but they could not contain the minds, hearts, and determination of those inside. Every clandestine plan, shared morsel, secret book, or whispered joke was a quiet triumph against oppression. The story of Stalags and Oflags is one of survival and ingenuity, a chapter of World War II that reminds us that even in the darkest moments, humanity persists. And as the war drew to a close, the survivors of these camps emerged not only as witnesses to cruelty but as living embodiments of endurance, courage, and the will to reclaim freedom against impossible odds. The morning mist hovered over the campgrounds like a heavy curtain, concealing both fear and quiet determination. Prisoners stirred in their thin blankets, the remnants of sleep clinging to their bodies, yet their minds were already alert to the challenges ahead. Inside the Stalags and Oflags, life was a relentless rhythm of observation, adaptation, and survival. For those who had endured the initial shock of capture, the next phase of captivity brought an entirely new set of trials: the struggle to assert some measure of control, the constant tension between obedience and defiance, and the challenge of maintaining hope when every day was defined by scarcity and confinement. Work assignments in stalags became the defining structure of daily life. Men were sent in groups to farms, factories, and construction sites, often escorted under strict guard. These labor details were brutal, particularly during harsh winters or scorching summers, and were designed to exploit the prisoner's physical strength while limiting opportunities for escape. Some prisoners found ingenious ways to mitigate the risk, hiding small tools or markings to aid future plans, while others relied on teamwork and solidarity to endure the long hours. Every interaction with guards carried a psychological element: a word too many could provoke punishment, while silence could be a shield against unnecessary attention. In Oflags, officers were exempt from manual labor, but their confinement carried its own weight. They faced an invisible battle, one waged against boredom, anxiety, and the slow erosion of morale. Isolation was particularly acute in Oflags. Officers were often separated by nationality or rank, and the lack of labor meant that their time was filled with intellectual and social maneuvers. Secret schools, debates on military strategy, and language classes became both a pastime and a method of resistance, a means to preserve identity and mental sharpness. Even minor victories, a hidden book, a successful correspondence with family, a small theatrical performance, were celebrated quietly, reinforcing the fragile sense of agency that captivity had threatened to erase. The mental discipline developed in these environments often mirrored the strategic thinking required in battle, though here, the stakes were survival and dignity rather than territorial gains. Medical care, or the lack thereof, was another defining feature of life in the camps. The combination of poor nutrition, overcrowding, and extreme weather led to outbreaks of disease, ranging from dysentery to respiratory infections. Camp hospitals were often under-resourced, relying on prisoner medics or scant supplies from Red Cross deliveries. For those suffering from chronic conditions, relief was inconsistent, and many faced the slow deterioration of health as a grim inevitability. Yet prisoners demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in coping with these challenges. Makeshift remedies, hygiene routines, and informal support networks became crucial strategies, illustrating the capacity for resilience even in conditions engineered to suppress it. Food scarcity shaped every aspect of camp life. Meals were rationed, often insufficient in calories and nutritional content, forcing prisoners to improvise. Stalag prisoners sometimes bartered personal belongings for additional rations or devised small agricultural plots within the camp to supplement their diet. In Oflags, officers occasionally received slightly better provisions, but the constant threat of hunger created an omnipresent stress. Prisoners developed complex social systems to distribute food fairly, ensuring that the weakest or most ill were not left to starve, and creating bonds of solidarity that could outlast months of deprivation. These small acts of cooperation were vital to survival, offering both sustenance and psychological comfort. The concept of escape was ever present, an undercurrent that shaped interactions and routines. Tunnels, hidden compartments, and coded messages became daily considerations, occupying prisoners' thoughts and requiring extraordinary ingenuity. Guards were vigilant, yet prisoners studied their patterns, seeking weaknesses in patrols or gaps in surveillance. Even failed attempts had significance, lessons learned, morale bolstered, and the assertion that captivity did not equate to surrender. In some cases, entire networks formed to aid escape efforts, coordinated with locals or fellow prisoners in other camps. These activities infused the monotonous daily life with purpose, providing an outlet for energy, creativity, and defiance. Psychological resilience emerged as a central theme in both Stalags and Oflags. Men faced continuous stress, uncertainty, and fear, yet many found ways to maintain identity and community. Humor, storytelling, and ritual became coping mechanisms, while art, music, and literature offered mental escapes from the harsh realities of confinement. Letters from home, when they arrived, were treasured reminders of life beyond the fences, reinforcing emotional bonds and providing a sense of normalcy. Social hierarchies within the camps also played a role in survival, as alliances, friendships, and networks could determine access to resources or protection from arbitrary punishment. The treatment of prisoners varied widely, shaped by nationality, rank, and the disposition of individual guards. Western Allied officers often experienced conditions that, while harsh, were regulated by the Geneva Convention, though violations occurred. In contrast, Soviet soldiers frequently endured far more severe conditions, reflecting ideological and racial prejudices. Starvation, forced labor, and disease led to mortality rates that were alarmingly high in some camps, illustrating the cruel disparities inherent in the system. The unequal treatment highlighted both the arbitrary and systematic nature of oppression within these ostensibly organized structures, and forced prisoners to navigate moral and social dilemmas daily. As the war progressed and Germany's resources dwindled, overcrowding became an acute problem. Camps swelled with new prisoners from conquered territories, straining already limited food, water, and medical supplies. Sanitation systems broke down, disease outbreaks became more frequent, and tensions escalated between prisoners and guards. Forced evacuations ahead of advancing Allied or Soviet forces led to brutal marches under harsh conditions, exposing men to extreme physical and psychological stress. These movements, often undertaken without adequate preparation or provisions, underscored the collapse of the German war effort and the increasing desperation of camp authorities. Amid these conditions, acts of solidarity and humanity persisted. Prisoners shared scarce food, provided care for the sick, and created networks to support those in greatest need. Cultural and intellectual activities continued, offering a semblance of normalcy and reinforcing morale. Even minor successes, a small contraband book, a successful escape attempt, or a friendly gesture from a guard became treasured victories. These moments of human connection and creativity affirmed the prisoner's identity and resilience, demonstrating that even in extreme adversity, people could assert agency and preserve dignity. Liberation brought relief but also new challenges. Returning home after years of confinement required physical rehabilitation, psychological adjustment, and reintegration into societies ravaged by war. Many survivors carried enduring scars, yet the endurance, ingenuity, and social bonds forged in captivity often guided them through these difficulties. Memoirs, letters, and oral histories preserved the experiences of Stalag and Oflag prisoners, ensuring that the lessons of resilience, moral courage, and ingenuity were not lost. These accounts serve as reminders of both the cruelty of war and the indomitable capacity of the human spirit. The history of Stalags and Oflags illuminates a distinct dimension of World War II, the struggle for survival within an environment designed to control, exploit, and suppress. Unlike concentration camps, which embodied systematic extermination, these prisoner-of-war camps combined structure, discipline, and strategic exploitation with extraordinary instances of human resilience. They reveal the spectrum of human experience in captivity, fear, cruelty, hope, and defiance. They also underscore the psychological and social battles that mirrored the physical confrontations on distant battlefields. In understanding these camps, we gain insight not only into historical events but also into enduring lessons about solidarity, ingenuity, and the capacity to preserve humanity under extreme conditions. Ultimately, Stalags and Oflags were more than just sites of confinement, they were arenas in which human endurance, creativity, and moral courage were tested daily. Every clandestine plan, every shared ration, every whispered story represented a quiet triumph over an oppressive system. The lives of those held within these camps stand as enduring testimony to the strength of the human spirit, revealing how even in captivity, men could resist, adapt, and assert their dignity. The story of these camps remains an essential chapter of World War II history, offering lessons on survival, resilience, and the unyielding drive for freedom that transcends time and place. A cold wind swept across the camp, rattling the thin wooden barracks and carrying with it the sounds of a restless world beyond the fences. Inside the Stalag and Oflag compounds, life unfolded with a mix of routine and improvisation, a delicate dance between the imposed order of captivity and the human instinct to resist it. Unlike the chaos of the battlefield, here the conflict was quieter but no less intense. Every day demanded vigilance, creativity, and courage, as prisoners navigated a complex web of rules, scarcity, and psychological pressure. It was a world where small victories mattered immensely, and the ability to endure was measured not just in strength, but in intelligence, adaptability, and subtle defiance. Prisoners quickly discovered that survival depended on mastering the art of observation. Every interaction with guards, fellow inmates, or delivery personnel carried significance. Men learned to read facial expressions, recognize patterns of behavior, and anticipate potential dangers. The most successful prisoners became adept at negotiating privileges, securing extra food, or arranging temporary relief from labor details. In stalags, where work assignments were compulsory, this often meant volunteering for difficult tasks with hidden advantages or forging alliances with sympathetic locals or guards. In offlags, officers focused their energy on mental engagement, strategizing for future escape attempts, or maintaining social structures that provided stability amidst uncertainty. The social dynamics within the camps were both intricate and essential to survival. Prisoners organized themselves into informal hierarchies, often based on rank, nationality, or skills. These structures served practical purposes, distributing scarce resources, coordinating work details, and establishing mutual protection. Yet, they also fostered a sense of community, reducing the isolation that could otherwise become debilitating. In Oflags, intellectual pursuits became a central element of social life. Officers held lectures, debates, and language classes, using knowledge as a shield against the encroaching monotony of captivity. These activities reinforced identity, morale, and the idea that the mind could remain free even when the body was confined. Hunger and malnutrition were constant companions. Food rations, when provided, were often insufficient in quantity and quality. Prisoners became highly resourceful, supplementing their diets through bartering, clandestine trading, or cultivating small vegetable plots where permitted. For some, ingenuity extended to camp kitchens, where men combined meager ingredients to create edible meals, sharing knowledge of recipes and preparation techniques. The act of preparing and sharing food became a form of community building, a practical demonstration of cooperation that could sustain both body and spirit. These small triumphs offered reassurance that life could continue with dignity, even under oppressive conditions. Health was another pressing concern. Overcrowded barracks, poor sanitation, and limited medical resources created fertile ground for disease. Dysentery, scurvy, respiratory infections, and frostbite were common afflictions. Medical care often relied on prisoner medics, Red Cross deliveries, and improvised remedies. For many, maintaining hygiene, protecting vulnerable individuals, and improvising treatment plans were acts of survival. In addition, the psychological strain of captivity stress, anxiety, and uncertainty manifested physically, further complicating health management. Prisoners adapted by establishing routines, monitoring one another's well-being, and finding small ways to protect themselves against both illness and despair. Escape remained a persistent and defining aspiration. It was not simply a desire to leave, it was a reaffirmation of agency, a declaration that captivity did not equate to submission. Prisoners devised increasingly sophisticated plans, tunneling under fences, forging identification papers, or coordinating with outside networks. Attention to detail was crucial, and ingenuity often determined success or failure. Even unsuccessful attempts had value, serving as training exercises and boosting morale by demonstrating that resistance was possible. Escape efforts required trust, collaboration, and secrecy, fostering bonds among participants and offering a tangible focus for mental energy in an otherwise constrained environment. The psychological dimension of camp life was as complex as the physical. Fear, boredom, and monotony tested the limits of resilience. Men developed coping mechanisms that ranged from humor to clandestine art projects, secret writings, and storytelling. Shared experiences, both dramatic and joyful, became the foundation of emotional solidarity. In Oflags, cultural pursuits flourished as a form of defiance. Plays, music performances, and clandestine lectures created an environment where imagination could counteract oppression. For Stalag prisoners, small victories in labor, bartering, and escape planning provided similar psychological sustenance. Maintaining hope and purpose was a daily endeavor, often requiring ingenuity and the ability to find meaning in small acts. The treatment of prisoners varied across camps and nationalities. Western Allied soldiers frequently experienced conditions aligned, at least partially, with the Geneva Convention, while Soviet prisoners endured severe neglect, brutality, and hunger, resulting in high mortality rates. These differences underscored the ideological and political factors that shaped daily life, creating complex social hierarchies and moral challenges. Prisoners had to navigate these dynamics carefully, balancing survival with ethical choices, and sometimes making difficult decisions about sharing resources, reporting infractions, or participating in clandestine resistance. Forced labor remained a central aspect of Stalag life. Prisoners were employed in agriculture, construction, and industry, contributing to the German war effort while under strict supervision. These labor assignments were physically demanding and psychologically taxing, particularly when exposure to harsh weather, injuries, or illness compounded the strain. In Oflags, officers engaged in administrative, educational, or covert resistance activities, contributing indirectly to both morale and intelligence. The contrast between the types of labor highlighted differences in hierarchy, legal protection, and opportunity, yet in both contexts, survival required adaptation, perseverance, and the ability to leverage skills and knowledge creatively. As the war drew toward its climax, conditions in the camps grew increasingly desperate. Overcrowding intensified scarcity, sanitation deteriorated, and outbreaks of disease became more frequent. Evacuations ahead of advancing Allied or Soviet forces led to forced marches under brutal conditions, exposing prisoners to hunger, fatigue, and the elements. These death marches demonstrated the extreme human cost of a collapsing war machine and tested the limits of endurance and solidarity. Despite the harshness, prisoners found ways to support each other, sharing water, medical attention, or moral encouragement, revealing the capacity for cooperation even under extreme adversity. Humanity persisted in unexpected ways. Guards occasionally exhibited leniency, prisoners devised creative solutions to survive, and clandestine acts of compassion reinforced the social bonds that were essential to resilience. Letters from family, smuggled books, and quiet celebrations of personal milestones provided emotional sustenance. These moments of human connection, though small, were lifelines, reinforcing the idea that dignity, creativity, and compassion could survive even in environments designed to suppress them. Liberation brought relief and bewilderment. Prisoners returned to societies devastated by war, often physically weakened and emotionally scarred. Reintegration posed its own set of challenges, including the loss of family members, destroyed homes, and the lingering trauma of captivity. Yet the skills, resilience, and solidarity developed in Stalags and Oflags often guided survivors through these difficulties, allowing them to reclaim lives disrupted by years of confinement. Memoirs, oral histories, and personal accounts preserved these experiences, ensuring that future generations could understand the human dimensions of captivity, resilience, and ingenuity. The legacy of these camps extends beyond historical record. Stalags and Oflags illustrate the spectrum of human behavior under extreme duress, courage and cruelty, ingenuity and adaptation, despair and hope. They provide insight into the psychological and social challenges of captivity, revealing how men found ways to assert agency, maintain identity, and preserve humanity. Understanding these camps is not merely an academic exercise, it offers enduring lessons about resilience, cooperation, and moral courage, demonstrating the capacity to survive, adapt, and resist even when circumstances are overwhelmingly hostile. Ultimately, life in Stalags and Oflags was a test of both endurance and ingenuity. The fences, guards, and routines sought to contain bodies, but the minds of prisoners remained unconstrained. Acts of resistance, both large and small, affirmed humanity and dignity, creating a rich tapestry of survival against the odds. These stories reveal that even in the most controlled, oppressive, and challenging environments, human creativity, solidarity, and courage can flourish, offering enduring testimony to the strength of the human spirit. In examining these camps, we gain not only historical insight but also inspiration, learning how resilience, collaboration, and moral determination can triumph over adversity in its many forms. The dawn of liberation in Europe brought with it both exhilaration and uncertainty. For the men held in Stalags and Oflags, the fences that had once seemed insurmountable were suddenly irrelevant, yet the freedom they longed for was complex and fraught with challenges. Liberation did not instantly erase the physical and psychological toll of years in captivity. Many prisoners stepped into a world that had changed dramatically in their absence: cities destroyed, families displaced, governments altered, and economies devastated. They were free in body but often trapped in the lingering effects of trauma, hunger, and prolonged confinement. The psychological landscape of freedom was as complex as the bars and boundaries they had left behind. Reintegration into civilian life required more than merely returning home. Former prisoners faced immense challenges in reconnecting with their families and communities. Some had lost entire families to war, others returned to find homes reduced to rubble or communities fractured by ideological divides. The absence of daily routine, the sudden flood of sensory and emotional stimuli, and the lingering hypervigilance cultivated during years of confinement created a profound sense of disorientation. Many struggled with depression, anxiety, and survivor's guilt, reflecting the hidden scars of their captivity. For officers from Oflags, accustomed to intellectual engagement and structured routines, the abrupt loss of hierarchy and predictability added another layer of complexity to their post-war adjustment. Yet amidst these challenges, remarkable resilience emerged. Former prisoners employed the skills honed in captivity: ingenuity, resourcefulness, cooperation, and strategic thinking to rebuild their lives. Those who had organized clandestine education, escape plans, or social networks found these abilities transferable to civilian challenges. Small acts of initiative, whether in finding work, reconnecting with family, or participating in local reconstruction, reflected the lessons learned during captivity: patience, foresight, and the power of collaboration. Former prisoners became quietly influential in their communities, translating survival strategies into practical contributions to post-war recovery. The cultural and social legacy of the camps persisted in subtle ways. Letters, diaries, and memoirs preserved the experiences of both Stalag and Oflag inmates, offering insights into daily life under captivity, methods of resilience, and moral dilemmas confronted in extraordinary circumstances. Art, music, and literature created or preserved during confinement often survived as testament to the human spirit, illustrating how creativity flourished even in conditions designed to suppress it. These cultural artifacts became tools for education and remembrance, ensuring that future generations could grasp the complexity of life as a prisoner of war, beyond statistics or official reports. Psychologically, liberation marked the start of a prolonged adjustment process. Former prisoners confronted memories of deprivation, loss, and fear, often triggered by seemingly mundane aspects of civilian life. The capacity for trust, so systematically undermined in captivity, had to be rebuilt. Individuals struggled to reconcile the discipline, cooperation, and hierarchy of camp life with the unpredictability of freedom. Social reintegration demanded patience, empathy, and support, and communities themselves were forced to confront the reintegration of men who had lived through extreme conditions that few could fully understand. Support networks, counseling, and connections with fellow survivors became vital resources, offering a sense of continuity and understanding during this transitional phase. For some, liberation also brought the moral challenge of confronting complicity, betrayal, or collaboration that had occurred within camps. Not every prisoner had acted heroically, and the complex human interactions ranging from cooperation with guards to conflicts over scarce resources needed reconciliation. These moral reckonings highlighted the nuanced reality of human behavior under extreme stress. Individuals had navigated survival, loyalty, and ethical choices within highly constrained circumstances, and post-war life required grappling with these legacies. Forgiveness, reflection, and the recording of personal narratives became part of the healing process, preserving lessons for posterity. The broader historical significance of Stalags and Oflags extends beyond individual experiences. These camps reveal the systemic mechanisms by which a nation sought to control, exploit, and suppress enemy combatants while maintaining an appearance of legality under international conventions. The distinction between Stalag and Oflag structures illustrates the layered approach to imprisonment. Rank, nationality, and military status determined not only labor assignments but also access to privileges and protections. Analyzing these systems provides insight into the bureaucratic and strategic dimensions of captivity, highlighting both the efficiency and the inherent cruelty embedded in the management of war prisoners. Stories of ingenuity and defiance remain among the most compelling legacies. Escape attempts, covert communication networks, and organized cultural and educational activities exemplify the resilience of human spirit under constraint. Even in camps where deprivation, overcrowding, and disease were rampant, prisoners found ways to assert agency and maintain identity. These acts of defiance were rarely grandiose. Often, they were subtle, measured, and ingenious, requiring strategic thinking, collaboration, and courage. They underscore a fundamental principle: captivity can confine bodies but cannot fully contain minds or suppress the drive for freedom and dignity. Health and nutrition, long compromised in captivity, continued to influence survivors' lives. Chronic conditions developed in the camps, ranging from malnutrition-related ailments to untreated injuries, required attention and adaptation in peacetime. Access to medical care, rehabilitation programs, and personal resilience strategies determined the long-term outcomes for many former prisoners. The prolonged impact of inadequate nutrition and harsh working conditions serves as a stark reminder of the physical costs of systemic confinement, and underscores the importance of ongoing support for survivors in post-conflict contexts. The human stories that emerge from these camps also highlight the universality of struggle and solidarity. Despite national, cultural, and linguistic differences, prisoners forged connections that transcended prior divisions. Shared adversity fostered mutual aid, emotional support, and practical cooperation. Acts of kindness, sharing scarce food, tending to the sick, or offering encouragement were crucial for survival. These lessons in empathy, collaboration, and resilience remain relevant far beyond the historical context of World War II, offering timeless insights into how human communities navigate extreme adversity. Finally, reflecting on Stalags and Oflags reminds us of the moral and ethical dimensions of wartime conduct. The camps illustrate both the capacity for cruelty under authoritarian systems and the enduring potential for human courage and compassion. They challenge simplistic narratives of victimhood and heroism, revealing the complex interplay of survival, morality, and agency. By studying these camps, historians, students, and readers gain not only an understanding of specific historical events but also a broader